Ads schmads. If you don't want ads, that's okay. Choose the Dave McWilliams Plus option on Apple Podcasts. And hey presto, no ads.
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is podcast time. We are going to be discussing today technology, AI, the impact on humanity of this extraordinary piece of new technology, in effect, that has in the last year, it was introduced, interestingly, John, AI, or at least this version of AI, the Chat GPT, was introduced in November 2022. So it's 1 year old.
So given our 12-month review.
12-month review, exactly. I see you were down in the south of France, I see.
I am swilling wine and driving around, having a good old time. I'm in Perpignan at the moment. Earlier on the week, I was in Carcassonne, driving through. Do you know what's amazing, actually? I was driving through all the vineyards and stuff, which I love, and it's just beautiful countryside.
Should have been drinking through the vineyards, not driving.
Well, I was doing that too. There was a field there that I'm sure I drank the whole lot of last year in the Minivar. But what is interesting, which I never realized before, is like, during the summertime, driving through the vineyards, they're all lush green, beautiful, but, rolling hills with lines of vines. But in the autumn time, in November, because all the leaves turn golden and red and brown, then you can actually see the different species of grapes. And some are like, some of the leaves are bright red, some are bright yellow, others are brown. And it's just the color of the countryside is just spectacular. And I'm just loving all that.
You sound like one of those Brits on one of those Odysseys. You sound like Michael Portillo on his fucking train.
Yes,
exactly.
With my pink pants.
Your pink pants, talking about the wine of the thing. Well, listen, I've had an amazing day because Lucy has released a new single this morning. She's got a new EP. This is the first one. It's called Plastic. It's part of a new EP that she's rolling out over the next couple of weeks. So it's all very exciting in the McWilliams household.
Give us a snippet of that.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, no, and it's quite grungy and it's quite different. It's quite indie. What we'll do is we play out with the whole track later on. But I've also, John, in your absence, been watching.
Have you been able to function?
I have. No, I've been pining away here. I'm one of those Labradors that loses their master. The HMV is master's
just standing
voice.
at the door, looking out the window.
Yeah, looking at the window. There's a gramophone there with a big sort of ear horny thing, and I'm just waiting to hear the dulcet sound of my mate, Mr. Davis. I mean, I'm pining away. But the Space Odyssey, Carry On, by Stanley Kubrick.
Yes.
The very opening scene of that, John, I want to talk about technology.
Yeah.
And the very opening scene of Space Odyssey. So we're talking about Stanley Kubrick, I think 1969, 68, envisaging a world 2001. But the opening scene is all about technology. And what there is an amazing vision of a couple of apes, right? And the apes are like hanging out, right?
That's right, yeah.
They're figuring out each other. There's two gangs of apes. And then one of them finds the femur, the bone of another ape, like the dead ape. And then he picks it up and he uses this to bash things with. So this is his tool. This is his piece of technology, right?
Yeah.
And the second scene cuts to a whole group of apes with little apes, baby apes, chatting to each other about how to use the tool. This is a fascinating thing, right? And then the third scene is that group of apes, those alpha primates, become the dominant apes in that gang of apes, right? So what Kubrick is saying to us is two things. Is one, physical technology always profoundly changes human experience, number one. So the physical technology is the bone that they use as a tool to bash other people. But the second bit, which is not always picked up on, is the little clip of the apes chatting to each other about how to use the bone. And this is all about how humans teach each other. So proto-humans, early humans, not only do we actually, and this makes us so different from other animals, not only do we actually come up with the technology, but we disseminate the information about how to use the technology, so we pass it on from human to human. And that is the sort of social aspect. Taking both of those together, Kubrick says, look, these apes became the dominant ones. But then he throws the bone up in the air, and magically that white bone turns into a white spaceship that is circumnavigating the Earth. And what Kubrick is saying, what Kubrick is doing there, John, is what economists have spent hundreds of years trying to explain. He does it in two scenes, which is basically technology is always with us. The humans that become adept at technology become the dominant humans in that group. And those humans become even more adept at technology by teaching their kids how to actually use things. When I'm thinking of AI, as you imagine now the spaceship going off into the night, John, right? When I'm thinking about AI, I think that this is just it. It's just part and parcel of this extraordinary human story, which is we are problem solvers. That's what makes us interesting as a species. And maybe that's what makes us dominant as a species. And at every juncture, we create these extraordinary tools or pieces of technology to solve problems. And by solving problems, we become much more efficient, much more productive, and we liberate part of our brain that was confused by those problems to do something else. And away we go, and away we go. And it's this constant iteration of technology and technology and humanity that is actually the story of humanity, or a story of humanity.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's the way it has been ever thus. But there is something about AI. I mean, it's only a year old, or it's only let loose a year ago. But I think it is a fantastic piece of technology. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. It worries me, though, because I think you say that most technologies solve problems.
Yeah.
This certainly solves problems, but it may also be a problem causer as well into the future. And I think we should acknowledge that and discuss that as well.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. I think you're right. No, I mean, what we'll have is we'll have a Socratic discussion, John, right?
Indeed.
Okay. It'll be like Plato in the cave, you and me, right? Even though you're down in Perpignan drinking red wine, and I am in the
Agora, surely.
I am in the HQ. We will definitely be in the Agora, but the Agora demands other folk in us. But I'm in the HQ, keeping the whole show together while you're out swanning around.
Thank God somebody's there.
Why don't we, as the second part of our discussion with the great Eric Lonergan, discuss AI, its implication for the economy and society? We will avail of Eric's large brain. We will go to London now. We will talk to Eric, and then you and I should come back and discuss this. Plus, we will then play out with a bit of Lucy's new music. So let's go to London.
Defo.
Let's talk to Eric. Now we're having a second part of our series with Eric Lonergan. As you know, a man with a huge, huge brain. He's going to talk to us about AI. Now, AI is something that, on the one hand, you've got the pessimists say robots are going to take over the world. And the optimists saying, well, hold on a second, there's going to be a massive productivity kick in the same way as there always is when technology comes around or new technology comes around. I'll just tell you, Eric, interestingly, we'd 70 events at Kilconomics. We were trying to do the briefs on all of them. It was Thursday afternoon. We'd already kicked off. We'd Friday, we'd 10 ideas. We'd Saturday, we'd have 40 events. It was like, oh, Jesus, what are we going to do brief-wise to give the comedians the briefs for the economists? And Nish and I just sat down and he said, man, it's time for AI. And because we hadn't done them, right? And you just plugged in. So we plugged in like amazingly say, let's talk about macroeconomics of Keynes versus Hayek. What questions would you ask if you wanted A, to be academic, or B, to be humorous, or C, to explain this to the common man? And you put all this into Chat GPT 4 or 5. I can't remember which one it was. And within seconds, outcomes. I mean, it's terrifying for me as somebody who's in the business of spoofing about economics and interviewing people and doing all that sort of thing. Because what you normally typically do, what I always do is, if we're going to talk to somebody about the book they've read or they've written, I'll read the book, I'll take up notes. It'll take me ages. It'll take me, certainly a couple of days. And on the side, we'll have all these little bits and pieces. Here we were actually getting questions, 10 questions for topics that I had conceived of about 2 months ago in my own little head, trying to understand, where are we going to take this discussion, right? And in my head, I'd planned out the arc, and you feed that into Chat GPT, and I am replicating it. I mean, it's extraordinary.
It is scary.
Well, it's scary, but B, it was doing what was taking me weeks to do in seconds. That's the other side. Eric, talk to me about AI and the impact it's going to have on the global economy.
Well, I think your description is superb, because it's a bit like, I often think when you sit down with ChatGPT now, it's a bit like if you were there and you saw the first photograph. Like, imagine seeing the first human photograph. Like, your view, you just know human history is going to change. Reading the first book, your first time on the internet, getting a first email, those were all technologies where you were never going to view the course of human history the same again. Now, I have to say, when I sat down with ChatGPT, now whether it's you say, write me a Beckett play about interest rates and inflation, or
with minimal dialogue, and exactly,
and then tell me what's going to happen.
Imagine Beckett doing a podcast, right? Imagine a long, silent Beckettian podcast, right? I mean, the great thing about Beckett, he's one of the few fuckers who wouldn't be affected by ChatGPT because he never chatted.
He'd have never gone over time. Or maybe he would have. That would have been the whole issue. Exactly. Will this podcast end or not?
Sorry, sorry, I just feel I'm burying myself up in the sand here. I'm burying myself up. Where's my umbrella? Anyway, let's go.
Well, so sadly, my first experience wasn't a kind of reproduction of a Beckett play. It was a lot more mundane, but I asked it to write me some code. Now, I'm probably like yourself, I haven't written code since I was 13. And I thought I'll do some, I'll backtest a trading strategy. So I'll get it to do some code on a trading strategy. When you ask a computer to do that, and in front of you, you see it writing lines of code, I think you just go, human history has changed. I mean, It's quite extraordinary to see a machine reproducing what would take a human being hours and hours and hours. And not only that, if you do it on Google now, you can press, because you've got a Bard, which is the Google's version of ChatGPT. You can press a little collaboration function, and it'll go through every line of code and even tell you where the bugs are and where the errors are. Now, that's quite extraordinary.
You're what you're doing is you're kind of seeing a machine think like you. That's the weird thing.
And that means everybody can now code. So you think, what's this thing called code? I mean, I kid you not, you could sit, if you've never coded before, if you spend a weekend on ChatGPT or Bard, you'll be able to write code. What does that mean? That means you can make programs.
Yep.
And what resources would have been required to do that 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? You'd have needed millions of dollars, euros, pounds worth of resources to be able to do that. And you can do that in a weekend. And so I think what it's going to do is enhance our productivity very, very substantially. And I'm very skeptical of the kind of it's the end of the labor market and we'll all be out of work. Because if you look at the history of technologies, there's what the psychologist comes back to the psychologist called availability bias. It's very easy to understand the jobs that are going to go, but it's an active imagination to see the jobs that are going to be created.
Very true. Very true.
And we fail in the active imagination. When we were kids, nobody said you could be a YouTuber, you could be a coder. There were all these.
It's true, yeah.
You could be a podcaster.
The vast creation.
You could take dry economics and turn it into comedy and festivals and podcasts. No, it's true, though. These are all platform-driven.
Right. It's a failure of the imagination. We can't imagine the kind of things we're going to do. But again, if you look in the arts, the other thing is this has already been adopted. And all that's happened this year is the advent of ChatGPT has brought it to the public imagination. But this has been going on. Firms have been using AI and machine learning to optimize pricing in supermarkets, airline tickets. They've been using it in medical science. I mean, to give you one example, very, very helpful in this domain is things like skin cancer. AI can screen images of skin pigmentation and identify it straight away because it's a very clear pattern recognition if it's got a shape or a color. So there are so many different tasks and applications where this will profoundly improve our productivity. And I think there will be jobs that suffer. You were saying it with the lawyers. But of course, we're in a world at the moment where, if anything, labor is scarce. So I think this is the real deal. You know, crypto and all that stuff was crazy hype. This is a really, really profound shift in technology.
Well, this is the fascinating thing, because the other day I was looking to do a very basic legal contract and contacted a couple of lawyers, and they came back with, really quite hefty fees. And I was thinking, after having editorialized the entire Kilconomics and Chat GPT, I thought, oh, look at this. I wonder if we can put in, small lease, blah, blah, blah. Here's the area. Here's the amount of money we're talking about. And then straight away, out comes the contract. Out comes a perfect legal contract under Irish law, because you put it under Irish law, la, la, la. It comes out. All you need now is a lawyer to notarize it. Mm. And you're talking a couple of £100 versus lots more than that. Yeah. And suddenly you think, wow, this is going to cannibalize an enormous amount of basic, what I would call, and let's come back to the threat, middle class, middle income, white collar jobs, freelancers, code writers, copywriters, advertisers, these sort of things that required people to sit down and say, give me a copyright ad for Coca-Cola. And you sit down and you think, right. And then I'd talk to my friend who's a graphic designer, and you say, the graphic designer, give us an image of that. So this is a lot of basic jobs and reasonably well-paid jobs. They're all going to be changed profoundly by this, because the machine can do it instead.
That's absolutely right. And those changes will take place. But there's also another dimension to it that's well worth being aware of, which is it should make us better at what we do.
Okay, explain that to me.
Well, what I mean by that is, if you look within the arts, if you're now making a short film, you'll do an animation and you will use AI to make it even more interactive, even more realistic, even more creative. So I think the arts may well be at the forefront of this. Yes, there is a threat, but I think it's going to be a lot of the more mundane dimensions. It doesn't mean we won't have artists. We'll have artists that utilize AI to do even more amazing, weird, and wonderful things. And I think you see this with an awful lot of technologies, is that we raise our bar in terms of what we expect. Now, when it comes to the lawyers, I mean, a world with fewer lawyers, would that be a problem?
It would be could be a problem for house prices in and around suburban areas in big cities. But I get your point. That basically certain industries have their peak and then they just disappear. And we go back to Schumpeter. Schumpeter would love AI, because what AI is doing is accelerating the process of what he would call creative destruction. It's accelerating it dramatically, as all technology does. And what you want to do is but the thing about...
also, David, jokes aside about the legal profession, if I look in the UK, it's crumbling at the moment, in the sense that you've insufficient resources. When you look at things like areas of human rights law or refugees or even the criminal law system, we are desperate for efficiencies. Think of healthcare provision. Healthcare has had a very mixed relationship to productivity, because obviously productivity is great because we can all live for longer and there are more cures, and technology has been consistently coming up with ways to improve our health, but that means ever greater cost.
Yeah,
and the area where technology has let us down in healthcare is in productivity, and so I think the great hope here is it could increase our productivity.
John,
Marco, you often talk about the irrationality of humans, and particularly in the context of markets and economics. If we let AI loose on markets and trading and making trades and making those decisions, what will that do if it takes the irrationality of humans out of the equation? What will that do to markets? Does it make them more efficient? Does it make them more rational or irrational?
It's a great question. Innovation always causes problems in financial markets. David, we know that's the one lesson from financial history. And so there will no doubt be more, and the crypto thing was a manifestation of that. I have to say, though, my own personal take on the interaction of technology and financial markets is, if anything, it adds fuel to the irrationality rather than making them more rational. And in particular, I think one of the dimensions where financial markets are irrational is people are extraordinarily short-termist. The psychological term for this is saying they're myopic. And I think technology, because it's so data hungry, you want ever higher frequency, which means you go shorter and shorter and shorter term. So I always play this game whenever I meet somebody who comes in and tells me we've got this amazing AI machine learning thing that's going to like beat the stock market. And I always say to them, what's your time horizon? And the longest time horizon I found is like 5 days.
Right. So everything becomes truncated.
Everything becomes truncated because you need loads of data.
But I mean, John's question is: does the machine become irrational? If you think of this is scraping data to replicate human behavior. Does AI then become emotional? Does it become irrational? Does it get excited? Because if it's actually going to reflect us, and if it's doing is scraping what we do, it'll have to eventually adopt the emotional characteristics of the human to replicate our behavior. And I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing, but I'm just saying this is...
You very quickly, start dusting off the science fiction.
So if the fundamental input into large language models is language, is us, right, and our behavior, then I presume that they will become slightly irrational too.
Yeah.
And we will then have to maybe at some stage...
I think they already are.
Okay,
you
think they already are?
With the hallucination and stuff.
Well, here's the thing. So there's some very simple things they'll get spectacularly wrong. So if you're an unwise university student at the moment and you think I'll use Chat GPT to knock out my thesis because, I've been partying too much and I've only got a couple of days left.
It will
produce you a beautiful thesis and it'll produce you a beautiful set of references. The only problem is the references are actually a kind of guesswork. And guesswork doesn't matter if you're trying to replicate, Samuel Beckett's plays or poetry, but it does make a big difference if you go and try and follow up the reference. And what you'll discover is the reference doesn't exist. So the surname is kind of right, or the first name, and it'll have some pages, and maybe the journal exists, but it effectively is guessing.
Yes.
It's predicting. So it kind of predicts what a journal should be, except it doesn't exist in reality. So there's no doubt about it. I mean, we have opened up a world that is going to be very, very fascinating.
Absolutely. And if we can just come back to the dull and boring economic narrow gauge of productivity, right? Because productivity is the elixir of economic growth and economic wealth, which is basically getting more out of less. You put less stuff in, you get more stuff out. And if you can do this on a personal level, on a company level, on a country level, you actually begin this ridiculous process of wealth creation, which is what we're all trying to do. And then what we do with that wealth is up to us. Do we want to redistribute it? Do you want to keep it for ourselves? That's the politics of it, right? Explain to me what you think, or is there something in the past that would suggest to us that look to the past, and this will give us an idea of where we might be going? Just even a framework on AI.
I think, if anything, you and I have spoken about this a lot, and it goes back to the origin of language and money. And actually, it is about the economic understanding of both of those social constructs. Right? And the interesting thing about language is it tends to be the case with economic development that you drive out dialects and a single language dominates.
Yeah.
Because it's most useful. It's more useful the more people can speak it. And the same is true of money as well. Money is this intangible thing that has no hard value, but its value is in its use. And it's more valuable the more people use it. And it's very difficult to break that power. It's called a network externality, because the money has no value to me as an individual. It only has value to me because it has value to you, and it's socially recognized. And that is why money and language are very similar in that regard. Language isn't backed by gold, and yet it's so valuable to all of us. Now, that's what we discovered with all of these technology platforms. Because Facebook is a language, Instagram is a language, Twitter is a language. And you see that in Visa and MasterCard on money, and they're incredibly difficult to break. Now, the problem I have I think AI has similar characteristics because of data. And so the more data you have, the more dominant you will be, the better your AI. So it becomes a game of scale. And as we know in economics, economies of scale are actually the enemy of competition.
Yep.
Because you take over. It's winner takes all. And so I think all of the challenges that we have about regulating social media, regulating the platforms, are going to become even more relevant when it comes to AI as a technology.
That's what I was just saying. So for the lawyers listening, you may well not be in contract law, but if you shift to regulation really, really rapidly, if I were you, if I were a lawyer now, you move very, very quickly into regulation. There is where you will make your sauce in the coming years. Eric, we will leave it there. I mean, we've opened, I mean, it's a cliche, but Pandora's box. And the problem we know with Pandora's box was it was a punishment to us. And it was a punishment for what? For finding fire, the very technology that Zeus was afraid we humans would get, because if we got fire, we would replicate the gods. And maybe AI is the 21st century equivalent of fire. See what I did there?
It was beautiful. It was art, Mac. It was art.
Okay.
You never get that out of GTP.
You wouldn't get that out of Chat GPT fucking P. I'll tell you that.
No, you would not. It'll be decades.
It'll be decades.
Do you know, I asked Chat GPT a little while ago to write me a song. And I gave it a couple of lines that I'd written and then said, write me a song in the style of, can't remember. I think it did a few different versions. One of them was Crowded House, and the other one was, Nirvana or something like that. And it was a pile of shite.
Well, there you go. There you go.
But it was a really interesting exercise. And what it did for me, and this is what I love about ChatGPT, is that it just sparked off a whole load of other ideas that you can build on. And I love that. But, some of the things that Eric was saying and that you were saying there was the idea that we don't have the imagination to understand what kind of new jobs and new things that AI is going to bring us. It's that leap of imagination that we don't have.
And I think it's the general idea that every generation, and particularly generations that live through big technological change, end up in a bizarre situation that had you said to you and me at the age of 20 that we would be doing this for a living with a technology called podcasting, that we were able to broadcast from one to many, as they call, that we didn't need a radio station. God forbid, we didn't even need RTE editors telling us what we can and cannot do. You would have said, no, you can't do that because... the interesting
especially when one is in Perpignan and the other one's in Dunleary.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is that the technology facilitates positions, jobs, ideas that you never imagined possible. There are many, many people all across Ireland, all across the world, are doing jobs now that didn't exist 10 years ago. That actually just didn't exist. Like I was thinking of it, one of the best paid jobs for graduates was a data analyst last year, right? Those jobs didn't exist 10 years ago, and ChatGPT will do away with them. Because it will do the data analyzing. So what I'm saying is there is this amazing, recurring, almost revolution. This is back to our friend Schumpeter, John. It's the churn that basically technology changes things. And this, I believe, and I'm not some sort of wide-eyed techno-optimist that believes that technology can solve everything, because that's not the case, right? I mean, it was very interesting, even listening to this Israeli-Palestinian thing the other day, right? When we did it last week. The Israelis remember on the 7th of October, they put all their faith in technology, and Hamas came through the thing with bulldozers. It's actually much more about, so technology doesn't change everything and doesn't solve everything. But what it does do, I think, is it removes certain jobs that maybe were going to be removed anyway, and it just does it in quicker. That's my sense.
The speed in itself is a problem, because there is... regardless, there's going to be collateral damage. And through every kind of iteration, as you were saying earlier, of technology, be it the printing press or the internet or whatever, there has been collateral damage. And we've been forced to adapt to a new way of working or living or whatever. And that's fine. And I am, like I said, a fan of technology, but I am concerned, maybe it's my lack of imagination, but I am concerned, especially given the fact that the makers of this technology, and the Elon Musks of the world and all those guys are warning us about the possible dangers of it. I mean, they haven't spelled out what those dangers are, but there are dangers. Exactly. But it is the unknown, and humans, by their very nature, are scared of the unknown.
Well, I mean, I think there's two things here, right? I think you're right. First of all, if you were a paid-up member of the trade union representing monks, scribes, and calligraphers in 1452, when Gutenberg came up with the press,
you'd be out with placards.
You'll be having your placard say, down with that sort of thing, right? It'll be like Father Ted, right? So John is a paid-up member. John is a shop steward of the trade union of monks, scribes, and other general writers who are sitting up there with their quill and their parchment saying, I will write about the Bible. And I will. And this guy, Gutenberg, comes up and says, no. Do you know what? Do you know the amazing thing about Gutenberg? He could print in one day Bibles 180 times faster than monks. Think about that, right? So the monks, obviously,
were they as colorful though?
They were even more beautiful. He was an amazing, because Gutenberg was a jeweler by trade, so he was really into beauty, right? But I'll just give you a fascinating thing, because I've been reading about the printing press, because that's what I do when you're away, John.
Yeah.
Right? That amazingly, the cities in Germany. So let's say the printing press. It's 1452. By about 1470, they're beginning to invest hugely in printing presses. So 1452, Gutenberg comes up with it. 1470, 1480 odd, they're investing hugely. These are incredibly expensive pieces of technology at the time, a bit like Chat GPT, right? So you did a lot of money to do it. But in the 100 years after Gutenberg, so from 1500 to 1600, in Germany, because Germany was where all the action was, right?
Yeah.
Cities that actually made their own printing press, because municipalities bought their own printing press because they were so expensive. Those cities in Germany grew 60% faster than cities without the printing press.
Wow.
And the implication is the printing press liberated something in humanity, which was called knowledge, education, inquiry, venturing, optimism, energy, all those things. And those cities grew unbelievably quickly. One other last thing, just because we're Irish and we're interested in these things. Cities that adopted the printing press in Germany were twice as likely to flip Protestant as cities that didn't during the Reformation, which is another fascinating idea. It's a fascinating idea. So that tells you social, economic, political, religious, super...
Just explain that one a little bit more.
So basically what happened was, because the printing press disseminated anti-Catholic material.
Yeah.
Because Luther was an expert. Luther was probably the best. If Martin Luther was hanging out today, John, he would be the Twitter Lord, or the ex-Lord. He was a Twitter man, right?
Yeah.
He was an amazing pamphleteer, right? So what is fascinating is that the cities that flipped Protestant in the Reformation in Germany, that were much more likely to have printing presses, because the undermining of Rome and the Catholic Church came from the dissemination of Luther's pamphlets against the Catholic Church. So you've got this extraordinary, this is where Max Weber gets his Protestant work ethic and all that sort of stuff, which has been disproved, but it's a very interesting theory. But what I'm saying to you is, in the 17th century in Germany, there is a reason why the second Renaissance in Europe happened in Germany. So the first Renaissance we know all about is Medici and Leonardo and Michelangelo, and it's Italian. There's a second Renaissance. And in actual fact, John, I'm reading this book. I'll show you now, right? See, when you're away, I'm reading this book, right? Look at that big yoke, right?
He hasn't seen the light of day, this fella. He's just been at home in the basement reading books.
It's called The German Genius, Europe's Third Renaissance, the Second Scientific Revolution, and the 20th Century by Peter Watson. It is about the German genius, right? And the German genius is the fact, I mean, it's an extraordinary book. It's about the fact that by 1920, there were 3 times more Germans had Nobel Prize winners than Americans and Brits put together, because the scientific inquiry and the intellectual inquiry all came in the 17th century with the start of the printing press. So it's a fascinating thing. But my point to you, John, is that AI will do something similar, but we don't know what it is.
Yes.
So the Germans could never predict there's going to be Luther, there's going to be Hegel, there's going to be Wittgenstein, there's going to be all these guys, right? They couldn't predict that. There's going to be Schiller, there's going to be Goethe, but they all emerged. And that's the leap of imagination that we have to have about AI, I think.
Yes, and I'm all up for that. As you said before, it's, people have little mutinies in their heads, but now those little mutinies are happening in their laptops.
They are happening in their laptops, but that the weirdest thing as well, what you've actually mentioned something very deeply psychological, is that sort of bizarre connection between our laptops and our heads now, and our smartphones and our heads, and the fact is, what is real, what is not real, what is technology, what is humanity, and there is definitely. God, we're getting all into all. You should go away even more. I'll sit. You drink wine, and I'll sit down reading my hard books. Right?
Yes, this is a philosophical podcast now.
No, it is, but it's that idea. Like, where does technology end? Where does humanity start? These are the sort of questions that I think we're going to be grappling with. But
integrity, I think, is a key point in all of this.
Well, you have none, and nor do I.
Oh, we're all right then.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck that. That's only for sheep warriors and things like that. Integrity, right? Integrity is overrated. It's overrated. But you know what I mean? Like, so I find it very exciting. I think what Eric is saying is very exciting. There is definitely a big row coming up, John, between who owns AI and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Is it going to be open source? Is it going to be closed source? What you find now is, of course, the people who own AI, which is the Microsoft of this world, are saying, oh my God, it couldn't be open source because all the loonies will get it. And what will they do with it? So basically, that's the monopolistic approach, and I presume Gutenberg was saying the same thing in 1540. He says, only me, I'll have the printing press and nobody else. But you can't stop these things. So that's the big thing. And that's why I was saying that lawyers, if you're a lawyer and you feel you're going to be out of work, jump from contract law into regulation very quickly, because there's going to be a massive industry in regulating the whole thing. But it is, I think we're on the cusp of something extraordinary that could be bigger than the Industrial Revolution. I really do.
Well, we can't stop it. So it's coming down the tracks.
Well, it's coming down the tracks. And just look, so we're going to play out with Lucy's new song. But for what Lucy's doing and what all young musicians are doing, think about what they're doing. They're making music on their own, in effect, right? In the old days, you needed, A&R men, you needed record labels, you needed all sorts of things. Now, what they're doing is technology is changing everything. It's changing how music is made. But the interesting thing, as you said about the shite songs, it doesn't actually make good songs. Yes.
Well, that's true. That is true.
So let's have a listen to Lucy, and if you fancy
real stuff, real music.
Exactly. You can follow Lucy McWilliams on Spotify. Check her out. This is her new single, and it's called Plastic. All right. Talk to you later.
Pretty thing, collecting dust. Undress me, hold me tight when we look at me, a toy again. Some little girl, some little boy's joy again. And you got me high up on the shelf, and I can't play all by myself. And I plastic to you. Do I breathe at all? Said you never grow up, but you're only getting older. You grow out of me like a crack in the pavement. Plastic is silent, and I don't want to talk. Promise me there will be trust. I'll take you out, spin you round, kick off the dust. I see you, a kid again. You want it all, you want it real, but we've just met. I've got you underneath my spell, and you can play all by yourself. like a crack in the pavement. Plastic is silent.